I have become the newbie DM in our friend group. And I don't mean that I'm new to DMing, although in the grand scheme of things, I sort of am compared to a lot of my friends who have been doing this for 10 plus years. What I actually mean is that I have become the person that keeps bringing in new people into the hobby. People who have always been interested but never had a chance to play, or people who are just curious because they've heard about it on Stranger Things. I've now brought in a good dozen or so people into the game that previously hadn't had any sort of D&D experience. And I think the way I do this is something that can help a lot of people. If you really want to try D&D and your friends are at least a little interested but they're a little hesitant about it, I think this is a great way that if you can convince them to just do a one-shot, could be really helpful in getting them into the game. Hi folks, I'm Misty. This is Misty Steps. Kick your shoes off, come on in, grab a drink, grab a snack, let's get comfy, and let's get into it. The first thing you're going to want to do is to figure out the level of knowledge that you're working with. Do these newbies have knowledge from Baldur's Gate 3 that they've played or other RPGs where they at least know the archetypes like a rogue versus a barbarian? Are they familiar with some memes that they've seen floating around? Have they watched Stranger Things? Or do they have zero information about it aside from it's a game that nerds play? This will help you decide how in-depth character creation day needs to be, and if it even needs to be its own day, or if you want to give them the chance to do it themselves. If they've only ever seen some dumb jokes, or if they've only really seen a couple of offhand comments from some sitcoms like Big Bang Theory or something that's not a great representation, you're probably going to want to set aside an additional day to help them work through their character sheets, kind of explain the general premise of the game that you're about to play, and lay down some ground rules. If it's possible, I do suggest having a more experienced player at the table who is aware of what your plot is for this one shot, just in case they need help stringing it along and connecting things and pushing the plot forward, because I've found that sometimes new players don't always know how to do that. Shocking enough, every single new party that I have DM'd for has been a couple. So it's been two partners who then my husband slots in as the third in their party, and that is to make it a little easier on me for encounter balancing, but also makes it a little easier in case they're not super into the roleplay thing. There's an opportunity then for them to see a more experienced person make the conversation with an NPC or come up with these creative ideas if they're just drawing a blank. Oftentimes, the newbies are the ones with the really creative stuff, and my husband does a great job at letting them shine and letting them have an opportunity to come up with those ideas, because this one shot is about them. It's the attempt to make them realize how cool this game can be and let them shine in that spotlight. As far as character creation goes, I do stick with level 1 and 2 for this one shot that I run specifically for newbies. While a lot of class features don't show up until level 3, it's much easier for a new person to fill out things for a level 1 than a level 3 just because there's so many less options to look at. I also often will limit them to what is in the player's handbook, and that's nothing against anything in Tasha's or Xanathar's. I think they're phenomenal. Tasha's is the best book. Fight me. That you don't need to fight me on that. That's a lukewarm take at best. But I do limit them often just because of the amount of information that's in front of them. If you go on to Roll20 or 5e.tools is what I commonly use, and you don't filter by just the player's handbook, there are so many options for feats or for races that are just almost overwhelming. I also try to make it as easy as possible and as simple as possible for rules. So I will often tell the why on these modifiers and what a proficiency is, but I'm not really going to highlight it until, for example, the rogue is trying to sneak through something and they get to add that proficiency bonus, and that's when I explain that. And I try to keep it in as minimal terms as possible. If we don't have a cleric in the party, I'm not going to talk about the gods of D&D. If we don't have a barbarian in the party, I'm not going to talk about rage as their shtick. I'm going to keep it as minimal as possible for the info dump because there is just so much in this game. I do also let them know the plot ahead of time. I have a one-shot in my back pocket at any given time for newbies that involves a haunted house. Most of it was stolen from the first adventure in Ghosts of Saltmarsh, but I have changed a lot of it just because that is a very long adventure and not really suitable for a one-shot for new players. But I at least let them know that it's a haunted house and there will be combat. And this helps them gear up for the fact that there is going to be fights. There are going to be things to investigate. There are going to be NPC interactions. And I think that that's really the key there, is that we want to make sure that we are picking up all of the highlights of D&D and putting them into this little snapshot. So we want there to be combat. That's a huge part of D&D. We also want the opportunity for roleplay and that character interaction with NPCs. We want the investigation and exploration of snooping around a house. We want the option to solve a puzzle or two, which there is in this haunted house. There's an illusory wall, as well as a puzzle on how to get to the mayor's son who had gone missing. In my haunted house one-shot, the players come to a town, and through a newspaper prop that I print off, they realize that there is a haunted house and that the mayor is looking for adventurers to assist. When they go to the mayor, there's the opportunity for them to have that roleplay interaction as the mayor explains that the house has been abandoned for decades, but recently hauntings have started up, so we're not sure what caused the hauntings, but his son, Ned, who is a young kid in his 20s, has decided to go try and figure it out and stop the hauntings himself, but hasn't come back in a few days. And all of the townsfolk and town guards are a little afraid to show up because other people who have gone there also haven't come back, and they're nervous. The mayor gives them some potion bottles. I do one per player, and they're off to the haunted house. At the haunted house, it's very run down, it's very spooky, lots of overgrown grass, so there's some animal encounters that can happen there, with some giant weasel burrows, some insects. The place is on a cliffside by the ocean, so there's a lot of mold and mildew options. There's a running joke that I always put some poisonous mushrooms in the sink, because it's so damp and gross in there, and almost always someone tries to pick them, someone always gets swarmed by centipedes, and almost always at least one person is going to have to make a constitution save for eating the mushrooms. As they explore, they get that reward of interacting with things and investigating things by finding valuables. And even if they're not valuables that they're going to use in this session, it opens up that idea of like your characters being rewarded and finding these things. So they find some books, they find gold, they find another healing potion, they find quills and inks, they find journals and a madman's diary potentially, gemstones, alchemical powders. Because this is a haunted house, I do also add in some sound effects that I make. So once they enter the house, they hear the thump, thump, thump of someone pacing back and forth upstairs. But that thumping never leaves that area and never even changes depending on what kind of noise they make. It's not until they get upstairs and find the illusory wall that they find the skeleton that was pacing on guard. And once that skeleton sees them, combat, other skeletons, and the big bad, the skeletal alchemist, appear. So, needless to say, there are plenty of combat options, and I make a point to, while I have a bunch of stat blocks and a bunch of potential options to take care of, they are only level 1. So once they've had 1 or 2 combats, I will conveniently remove some of the spiders or some of the weasels, and they won't see it. I think I've also done a snake in the well. Yeah, that's one I've done too. Once they explore all of downstairs, once they get upstairs, I do milestone leveling, so that's when they hit level 2. It has not ever occurred for these players to take level 2 first because of that thumping that I mentioned earlier that they hear. It adds a little bit of tension and it makes them afraid, and it makes any sort of video gaming brain that they have say, I need to get the loot before dealing with the boss. That said, if they do decide to go upstairs first, there are plenty of rooms for them to explore there and then have them level up as they enter the study or find the illusory wall. The puzzles that I have in here involve the illusory wall that I mentioned. They do have to figure out that there is an illusory wall. The map is intentionally drawn shorter on the second floor than the first floor. And as they figure that out, that's a fun puzzle for them. The other puzzle that I also put in there is how to get to Ned, the mayor's son that I mentioned had gone missing. Ned had gone into the house to try and figure out what was causing the hauntings and if he could fix it on his own. Got scared while upstairs, saw a skeleton walk out of the wall. He booked it, bonked his head, fell unconscious. That's where our players find him as he's just starting to come to. As they approach him, the floor falls out because, again, this is a rotted, molded place, and they have to figure out how to get to him. Whether that means the druid wild shapes into a spider to go get him and create a web for them to get across, or the rogue does the acrobatics checks to get him back. The world is their oyster. There's no set way to do this as much as just the creative freedom on how to do it. These aren't traditional puzzles because sometimes I don't always know how much my players enjoy reading like a riddle or figuring out a physical like codex type puzzle, and those take a lot more work to put together, whereas this takes maybe 30 minutes of prep and grabbing some stat blocks. Just something to keep in mind, but you could definitely make it far more puzzle heavy for your players if that's something that you know that they would be into. As a note on combat, combat does not need to be exciting for this game. This is their very first time having combat. Any sort of combat is going to be a lot for them. I did find a flowchart that I printed off for my first group online. I don't know if it helped as much. Instead, I tried to just break it down to action, bonus action, movement. And with action, bonus action, and movement, it was much easier for them to realize, okay, this costs an action, this costs a bonus action, and then I get to move. And while there are a couple of nuances there and a couple of extra bonuses that some classes can do, at level 1 and 2, I don't have to worry about it too much. We're also just trying to get through the base rules of how the game plays. I also recommend having a little bit of a plot hook at the end. For my players, every time that I have run this specific one-shot, they have somehow convinced the mayor, I have not rigged this, they have all rolled 20 plus on their charisma checks to convince the mayor to give them the haunted house to live in, now that it's no longer haunted. So they're excited to fix up their house and hang around the city and explore. I try to leave a bit of a plot hook, like a madman's diary from the thing that was causing the haunting, or maybe in your newspaper placing some little side notes about bandits becoming a problem in the future. I like this just because it gives them the option of, if they decide they want to make this into a full campaign, that's something that we can discuss as far as timing and what we could and couldn't do with that. I also always try to end the game with some social interaction, another chance to roleplay now that they've gotten a little bit more comfy with everything. And after the game, we sit down and we do a debrief, often over dinner, because this is an afternoon game. Did they like it? Did they not like it? What parts did they like or not like? I let them know that, hey, every DM is different, every table is different. So if you liked the concept of this, but maybe not this type of game, or maybe not my DMing style, that's okay. There's probably another DM that does this different that might suit your needs better. But you can at least say now that you've done a one-shot and you're at least familiar with the very basic core rules of D&D. On average, for a party of 3 players, 2 being complete newbies, I would say this usually takes about 6-ish hours as a one-shot. It is a long one-shot, but I think it would go a lot faster if I had less combat. But I also want to make sure that they're really getting the opportunity to try combat and try unique things. I have had it last up to 8 hours, and I've had it as short as 4, but 6 seems to be, 5.5, 6 hours seems to be pretty average for people. Just depending on how investigative your party is, how nosy they are in everything, and how much roleplay that they're actually willing to do at the table. There are plenty of newbie-friendly adventures that already exist, or you can definitely make your own. But I just wanted to highlight some of these things that I've done in order to convince as many people as I have to start enjoying this game. Now, they obviously don't all have a full campaign with me right now. 2 of them do. The others really enjoyed it, and I encouraged them to find some other campaigns to be in. Some of them have joined other campaigns, I know, so that's been super exciting. I know some have picked up Baldur's Gate at least just because they enjoyed it. But I think taking that general idea of exploration, roleplay, investigation, combat, and puzzles, and making sure that all of that is in your newbie session or your newbie one-shot is a great way to get them that true flavor of D&D, and still giving them the opportunity to make it exactly the story that they want as well. If you've hung around this long, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to tell me in the comments what your favorite one-shot is, and I will see you next time.